"I'm dying," Mountain Man whispered, but the abandoned fat girl found him and saved his life. "Get off this wagon and die where no one has to look at you," her stepfather snarled, shoving her down into the dust. "You're nothing but a heavy, useless burden, Clementine." The main street of the little frontier town fell silent for a heartbeat. Then the whispers started. A few men on the boardwalk glanced over, saw the plump girl struggling to her knees in her faded blue dress, and looked away as if shame were contagious. Two boys snickered openly. She pushed her hair out of her face with shaking fingers. Clementine Ward was 20, soft and round from shoulders to ankles, the kind of girl people never described as pretty, even when they were trying to be kind. Her dress pulled tight at the seams when she breathed. Mud and road dust clung to her hems. She could feel eyes raking over her, weighing her, judging her. "Please, Pa," she whispered, using the name he hated, reaching for the wagon. "Don't leave me. I'll eat less, I swear. I'll work harder, He flicked the reins so hard the horses jolted. "You'll do nothing. I'm done feeding you. Find some other fool to drag you round." The wagon lurched forward. One of her half-brothers laughed and tossed her battered carpetbag after her. It burst open in the street, spilling a worn Bible, 2 dresses, and a hairbrush, with most of its teeth broken. By the time Clementine scrambled to her feet, the wagon was already rattling out of town toward the dark line of pines, her family's backs turned, not so much as a glance over the shoulder. No one stopped them. No one offered her a hand. If you're listening to this, tell me, where in the world are you hearing Clementine's story from tonight? Because from here on, every step she takes will drag her farther from everything she's ever known. She walked until the town disappeared behind her and the road narrowed to a ribbon of dirt. The sun sank, taking what little warmth she had left. Her boots rubbed blisters into her heels. Branches snagged her sleeves as she stumbled off the road, following the faint sound of running water in hopes of finding a stream. By the time night fell, a hard, black mountain night, Clementine could see her breath ghosting in front of her. Her stomach burned with hunger, her legs trembled. She whispered half-forgotten prayers her grandmother had taught her, words about shepherds and lost lambs, but the pines only sighed in reply. Far above her, deeper in the timberline, a different kind of struggle was ending. Tobias Brennan lay face down on the cold stone, the smell of blood and bare fur thick in the air. He had once tracked elk through these ridges for days, without tiring. Tonight he could barely drag himself 3 yards. His shoulder was torn open where the grizzly's claws had raked him to the bone, his leg twisted at an angle that promised months of agony. If he lived long enough to feel it, he'd fought like a cornered wolf, knife flashing, rifle butt swinging. The bear lay still now somewhere out in the dark, but victory tasted like iron and ash. Every breath came shorter than the last. "I'm dying," he rasped to the empty cave, to the God he'd stopped talking to years ago, to the ghosts of the family he'd buried. "Ain't nobody coming, not for me." He closed his eyes, ready to let the darkness finish what the bear had started. Down below, Clementine stopped, heart pounding. On the faint breeze, she caught the copper-raw scent of blood. Moonlight spilled along the rocks ahead, silvering a thin, broken trail of red that led up toward a shadowed cleft in the cliffside. Common sense told her to turn around, to run from whatever had bled that much. But something else, loneliness, stubbornness, the memory of every time she'd been left behind, pushed her forward. She clutched her carpet-bag to her chest, swallowed her fear, and followed the blood up toward the dark mouth of the cave, not knowing that the man whispering his last breath inside it was about to change her life forever. Clementine stepped into the cave on trembling legs, one hand braced on the wall to steady herself. The air inside was cold and metallic, thick with the sharp scent of blood. It filled her nose, coated the back of her tongue, made her stomach twist. But she didn't turn back. She couldn't, not when someone might be suffering alone in the dark. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice small, swallowed instantly by the stone walls. Is anyone here?" For a moment there was only silence, then a faint rasp, thin as thread. "Go! Away!" She froze. It was a man's voice, weak, shaken, barely more than a sigh. Clementine stepped closer, eyes straining to adjust. A shape emerged slowly from the shadows, a broad silhouette slumped against the far wall. As she approached, details sharpened. A heavy coat shredded across the shoulder, boots caked in dirt and dried blood, a long rifle discarded on the ground. And then she saw him. His face was drawn and pale beneath the beard, his lips tinged blue. His right shoulder? She gasped softly. The wound was a ragged open canyon of torn flesh, red, black, and glistening, soaked through the shirt he'd tried to tie around it. His left leg bent strangely, the boot twisted outward at an unnatural angle. He looked like he'd been crushed under a mountain. This man was dying, not soon, now. "Oh, God!" Clementine whispered, falling to her knees beside him. Sir, can you hear me?" He cracked his eyes open. They were a deep, wintry gray, clouded with pain, but startlingly sharp as they focused on her. "You—" His brow furrowed. "You're a girl." Yes. "Ain't safe here," he murmured. "Bear might have cubs. She'll come back." Clementine shook her head, pushing her fear down. "I'm not leaving you. You need help." He let out a broken laugh. Too late. "No." Clementine swallowed hard. "Not if I can help it." Tobias Brennan hadn't seen another soul in months, not since he'd ridden into town for supplies in the spring and left the same day, refusing to linger among people who stared too long or talked too much. He'd chosen solitude, chosen silence, chosen to keep every part of himself locked away where grief couldn't find him again. And now, a girl he'd never met was kneeling beside him as though his life meant something. "Why'd you come?" he muttered. "Could have kept walking." Clementine hesitated. She didn't know how to explain the ache in her chest, that deep, hollow place carved out by years of neglect. She didn't know how to admit that when she saw the trail of blood in the moonlight, it reminded her too much of herself, unwanted, discarded, left to die. I couldn't leave you alone," she whispered. "Nobody deserves to die alone." He flinched at the word. Alone. Clementine didn't know why. Not yet. But it struck him like an old wound reopening. She swallowed her fear and reached toward his shoulder. "I need to clean this. It's infected." "Hurts," he breathed. "I know. I'm sorry." Clementine had no training, no tools, barely any strength left after days without food, but she had her grandmother's voice in her memory, warm and soft, teaching her which plants soothed fever, which roots could dull pain, which leaves closed wounds when nothing else could. She tore strips from her skirt to use as bandages. She dampened them with the water she'd carried from the stream. She washed the dried blood from his arm, apologizing each time he gritted his teeth. Her hands were shaking, but she kept going. Tobias forced himself to stay conscious, watching this round-faced girl who should have been miles from danger tending him with more care than he'd seen in 10 years. She wasn't like the women in the towns, polished and small and quick to judge. She was earthy, soft, flushed with effort, her hair falling loose around her cheeks as she worked. "Why were you out there alone?" he asked, voice hoarse. Clementine's breath caught. She didn't look at him as she answered. "They left me." "Who?" "My family." A beat of silence. Tobias stared at her, trying to understand. "They left you?" he echoed slowly. "In the woods?" "They didn't want me any more," she whispered. "Said I was too much trouble, too much food, too much weight, too much everything." Her cheeks burned, but she kept working. Her hands didn't stop. Tobias clenched his jaw, not from pain, but from anger so sharp it made him forget the wound in his shoulder. "No one should leave their kin," he growled. "No one." Clementine's hands stilled. She looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment Tobias saw the mirrored ache behind her eyes, the unspoken truth that both of them were broken in ways the world never bothered to mend. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding carved by loneliness, by abandonment, by loss. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, cold and sharp. Inside the cave, a dying man and a discarded girl clung to a fragile thread between life and death, two outcasts, breathing the same trembling breath. And neither of them knew that this was only the beginning. By dawn, Tobias was burning with fever. Clementine had not slept. She'd spent the long, cold hours pressing cool cloths to his forehead, whispering soft prayers between her trembling breaths, and feeding him sips of water whenever his eyes fluttered open. The night had been cruel, wind battering the trees like a warning, the darkness thick as tar outside the cave, but she'd stayed awake because every minute Tobias slipped deeper into unconsciousness terrified her. When morning light finally brushed the cave walls, she knew one thing with certainty. If Tobias stayed here, he would die. She tried shaking him gently. "Sir, Tobias, you need to wake up." His eyes cracked open, glazed with fever. "You should run. Leave me." Clementine shook her head so hard her hair whipped across her face. "I'm not leaving you. I told you." "Girl," his voice broke, "I can't walk." "Then I'll make you walk." Tobias managed a weak, incredulous laugh. But even that small sound hurt him. Her heart clenched. "I know you're strong. You fought a grizzly and survived, so don't give up now." He looked at her, really looked, and something in his expression softened. Maybe it was the way her hands trembled, yet never hesitated. Maybe it was her stubbornness, or maybe it was simply the first time in 10 years someone cared whether he lived. "Help me sit," he muttered. She slid her shoulder under his, bracing both feet and pulling with everything she had. Tobias grunted in agony, breath hissing between his teeth, but together, slowly, they got him upright. Clementine's vision swam. Tobias was heavy, carved from muscle and years of hard living. She was short and round, not built for carrying anyone, but she didn't let go. After resting him against the cave wall, she tore the blanket from her bag and knotted it into a makeshift sling. She wrapped it around his chest to support his injured shoulder, then ripped more fabric from her skirt to bind his broken leg tight against a sturdy branch. "You're full of surprises," Tobias rasped. "You're full of injuries," she replied, forcing a shaky smile. He huffed a breath, almost a laugh. When she finally got him standing, his arms slung across her shoulders, she felt the full weight of him nearly crush her. Her knees buckled, but she set her jaw and pushed upward. "Lean on me," she whispered. "I'll bury you," he argued weakly. "Then fall the other way," she snapped softly. Despite the pain, Tobias let out a low, breathless chuckle. "Bossy thing." Clementine blushed. "I'm trying to keep you alive." "Then keep being bossy." They moved like that, inch by inch, out of the cave and into the morning light. The forest was cold, the air sharp in their lungs. Birds called overhead, unaware of the fragile struggle happening below. Clementine guided him toward the tree line, her breath coming fast in little bursts. "Tobias," she panted, "we need somewhere safe. Do you have a cabin? A shelter?" He pointed weakly north. "About 3 miles." Her stomach dropped. 3 miles? "You asked." She closed her eyes briefly. 3 miles over rocks, roots, uneven ground, and mountain terrain, even without a wounded man, was nearly impossible. But she nodded. "Then we'll go." The first few hundred yards were agony for both of them. Tobias's injured leg dragged, catching on roots. Every breath he took was a fight. Clementine's muscles screamed under his weight, her back burning. At one point, she nearly collapsed, and Tobias pushed away from her. "I'm dragging you down," he growled. "Go, save yourself." "No, you'll die out here." "So will you," she said, "and I won't let that happen." Something in her voice, raw, desperate, unshakable, stunned him into silence. They kept moving. Whenever Tobias stumbled, Clementine dug her heels into the earth and took his weight. Whenever she faltered, Tobias clenched his jaw and forced himself upright so she wouldn't fall. They became two people leaning on each other, bound not by strength but by necessity. Around midday, Tobias collapsed. His legs gave out, and he hit the earth with a thud that sent birds flying from the trees. Clementine dropped to her knees beside him. "Tobias?" His head lolled. His skin was hot enough to burn her hand. Fever thrummed through him violently. "No, no, no, stay with me," she begged, shaking him softly. His lips parted, barely moving. "Clementine, I'm done." "No." She felt tears sting her eyes. "You listen to me. You didn't die fighting that bear, and you're not dying on the forest floor, not while I can still breathe." He groaned. Why are you trying so hard?" "Because you're the first person in years who didn't look at me like I was disgusting." Her voice cracked. "Because you're the first human being I've spoken to who didn't want to hurt me. Because I know what it feels like to be left behind. And I won't do that to you." His eyes opened, just barely, and he stared at her, stunned by the honesty, the pain etched in her words, the fire behind her fear. "You deserve better than the world gave you," he whispered. "So do you," she whispered back. Somehow, she didn't know how, she got him back on his feet. 1 hour later, they reached a ridge overlooking a hidden valley, and there, nestled between pines and wildflowers, was a small, weathered cabin half lost in the mist. Tobias stared at it through bleary eyes, voice barely above a murmur. "Home." Clementine tightened her hold on him. "Then let's get you there." And as they took the final steps toward the cabin, a place that had known nothing but loneliness for a decade, neither of them realized they were stepping into a new life that would change both of them forever. The cabin door creaked open with a tired sigh, as though it hadn't been touched in weeks. Inside, the air was cool and dust-scented, but the space was sturdy and solid. 4 walls, thick logs, a stone hearth, and a cot in the corner draped with a heavy wool blanket. It wasn't much, but to Clementine, who had slept the last 3 nights under trees, it felt like a palace. For Tobias, half conscious and swaying, It was salvation. Sit down, she urged, guiding him toward the cot. He braced himself on the wooden post, teeth clenched as pain rattled through him, and sank onto the bed with a ragged groan. Clementine knelt beside him, wiping sweat from his brow with a cloth she dipped in a basin of cold water. "You made it," she whispered, voice trembling with relief. Tobias exhaled slowly. "Because of you." She shook her head. "Because you're strong." "Strong men die every day in these mountains," he muttered. "But you held me up." Her cheeks warmed, but she pretended not to hear the weight in his words. She worked quickly to settle him, propping his broken leg on a folded blanket, checking the bandages on his shoulder, pressing her palm to his forehead. The fever still burned under his skin like a hidden fire. "You need herbs," she murmured, "and real food, and warmth." She looked around the cabin and found a stack of split logs by the hearth. Gathering them in her arms, she built a fire the way her grandmother had shown her, kindling first, then small branches, then logs. When the flames finally sparked to life, crackling with heat and light, the cabin transformed. Warmth washed over the room. Tobias watched her from the cot, his gaze half-lidded but steady. "You know your way around trouble," he murmured. Clementine shrugged. "I had to. Life doesn't give girls like me many choices." He frowned. "Girls like you?" She hesitated. The words were always difficult to say aloud. "Girls who are big," she whispered. "Girls no one wants." Tobias's brow tightened, but he didn't argue, not yet. She rose and headed to the small shelves. They held only a few things: a tin of salt, a bag of dried beans, a jar of wildflower honey. Her heart clenched. "There's so little." But Tobias shook his head. "Enough." She began to cook, mixing beans with water in a tin pot over the fire. The smell of the warming broth filled the cabin. Tobias closed his eyes, breathing it in like a man starved. "You've lived alone a long time," she said softly. 10 years, he answered. "Were you lonely?" A long, heavy silence. "Every day." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. When the stew was ready, Clementine helped him sit upright and fed him slowly, small spoonfuls, careful not to jostle his wounds. He ate with quiet gratitude, each bite steadying him a little more. "You cook like someone who's been feeding families all her life," Tobias murmured. "My grandmother taught me," Clementine whispered. "She was the only one who ever wanted me." Tobias studied her face as though seeing something important. When he finished, she set the pot aside. "Rest. I'll clean up." But when she tried to stand, his fingers curled weakly around her wrist. "Stay." Clementine froze. She looked down at him, his wounded shoulder, the bruises along his ribs, the vulnerability in his fever-bright eyes. He was a mountain man, broad and scarred, someone who commanded storms and survived winters alone. But now he looked at her as though she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. So she stayed. She pulled a chair beside the cot and sat with her hands folded in her lap. Tobias closed his eyes, chest rising and falling unevenly. After a moment, Clementine reached out, hesitating, and brushed his hair back from his forehead. He let out a breath, a soft, relieved sound that made her heart squeeze. The hours drifted by slowly. She washed his wounds with gentle hands, humming under her breath. It was an old lullaby, cracked with forgotten words, but it soothed him. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside the fire glowed and the walls held fast. This small hidden cabin, became a cocoon. By the second day, the fever began to break. Clementine could see it in the lessening flush of his cheeks, the steadier rise of his breath. She sat by him while he slept, repairing tears in his coat, cleaning the cabin, boiling herbs she'd collected from the woods. Tobias woke in the evening, the firelight casting his features in warm gold. "You're still here," he murmured, voice rough. "I told you I would be." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, "I don't deserve this?" "What do you mean?" "This care, your time, your hands, your strength. I've done nothing for you." Clementine swallowed. "You don't have to earn kindness." Tobias's breath hitched softly. No one had spoken to him like that since the day he buried his family. Silence filled the cabin, warm and fragile. Finally, Clementine added, "And you would have helped me if our places were reversed." "No," he whispered. She blinked in confusion. "I wouldn't have survived." He shifted slightly, eyes locked on hers. "If you hadn't found me, Clementine, I'd be dead. The world doesn't usually send angels into caves." Her face flushed a deep, burning red. "I'm no angel." "You are to me." Those 4 words hit her like a blow. Gentle, breathtaking, unbelievable. Clementine broke their gaze first, turning toward the fire. She didn't trust her voice not to tremble. No one had ever spoken beautifully of her, not her family, not strangers, not anyone. And yet Tobias said it like a truth he'd carried long before, speaking it aloud. Outside, snowflakes began to fall, soft, slow, drifting past the window. Winter had come early. Tobias shifted, grimacing in pain. Clementine rushed to support him, slipping an arm behind his back. Their bodies pressed together for a brief moment, his weight heavy but warm, her breath catching at the nearness of him. "Easy," she whispered. His eyes flicked to her lips. For a moment, only a moment, it felt like the world held its breath. But then he closed his eyes and leaned back, exhausted. Clementine pulled the blanket up to his chest. "Rest. I'll be right here." And she was. Night after night, she sat beside him as snow blanketed the mountains, as wolves howled in the distance, as the storm raged and the cabin glowed. She fed him, warmed him, soothed him, stitched him back into life with patience and quiet devotion. And somewhere, in the long hours between dusk and dawn, a tenderness began to bloom, unspoken, fragile, undeniable. Neither of them said the word love, not yet. But the fire saw it, the cabin felt it, and the mountains, ancient and silent, bore witness to 2 souls beginning to heal each other. The storm outside deepened as winter dragged its white hand across the mountains. Days passed, then weeks. Tobias slowly regained his strength, first sitting up without support, then hobbling across the cabin with a carved walking stick Clementine fashioned from a fallen branch. His shoulder healed in jagged scars, and though the pain lingered, he bore it with the quiet stoicism of a man who had lived too long with grief. But something else grew in the cabin, too. Something gentle, careful, and frightening in its intensity. It came in the way Tobias's eyes softened when Clementine laughed, in the way she lingered when adjusting his bandages, in the silent moments they shared before the fire when neither needed to speak to feel understood. Yet beneath that warmth lay shadows, secrets neither had dared to voice. One evening, with snow piling knee-deep outside, Tobias sat sharpening a knife by the fire. Clementine was stitching a tear in his coat. The silence between them was peaceful, but Tobias's eyes kept shifting to the door, then to the window, then back again. "You're uneasy," Clementine said gently. Tobias didn't look up. "There's something I haven't told you." Clementine set the coat aside, her heart tightening. He inhaled slowly. "The attack. The grizzly. It wasn't the first danger I've faced in these woods. Someone's been tracking me for months." Her breath hitched. "Someone? Who?" "A trapper named Jedediah Crow. Meanest man I've ever known. Cruel. Saw my cabin, decided it should be his, claimed the land was unmarked and he had more right to it. We had words. Then he tried to run me off these mountains." Clementine swallowed. "And he's still out there?" "Far as I know." Tobias's jaw tightened. "If he finds out I'm wounded, if he realizes I've been weakened, he'll come." She moved closer, instinctively reaching for his hand. "We'll handle it." He looked at her, really looked, and saw something fierce in her eyes that startled him. Clementine had always been soft-spoken, gentle, afraid of the world, but now she wasn't just a girl trying to survive. She was someone with something to protect. And Tobias realized then how much she'd changed in these weeks. Her cheeks were still round, her hands still soft, but she carried herself differently, no longer shrinking away, no longer apologizing for breathing. She had found purpose. She had found him. He squeezed her hand. "I'll keep you safe." She shook her head. "No, we'll keep each other safe." The simplicity of her words struck him like a vow. That same night, as they shared stew in front of the crackling fire, Clementine spoke softly. "Tobias, there's something I haven't told you either." He looked at her with quiet patience. "I didn't just wander into the forest," she whispered. "My family left me there on purpose." "I figured," Tobias said, voice low but not cruel. "The fear in your eyes when I mentioned men earlier, the way you flinched at your own name, I recognized it." "You did?" He nodded. "I've seen animals that have been beaten. They move the same way." Her throat tightened, and she blinked fast to keep tears from spilling. "My grandmother died when I was 9, she said quietly, "and she was the only one who ever loved me. After that, my stepfather and brother said I ate too much, cost too much, failed at everything. They told me I was worthless, a waste of space." She swallowed, and I believed them. Tobias's jaw clenched, rage darkening his face. "No one with eyes in their head could look at you and think you're worthless," he said, voice trembling with fury he struggled to restrain. Clementine stared at him, breath caught. He softened. "You saved my life. You made this place a home. You fought for me." He paused. "And you should never have had to fight for the right to exist." Her lips parted, trembling. "You're not worthless, Clementine. Not then, not now, not ever." Tears spilled over, and she pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from sobbing. Tobias reached out, brushing her cheek with a calloused thumb, his touch gentle despite the strength in his hands. She leaned into it. For the first time in her life, she didn't apologize for crying, because he didn't look disgusted, he didn't look annoyed, he looked honored. Outside, the wind shifted. A low, distant crunch of snow broke the quiet. Tobias stiffened instantly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Clementine froze. Another sound followed, a snapping branch, heavier than an animal, too intentional to be the wind. Tobias grabbed the knife beside him, pushing himself upright despite the pain slicing through his leg. "Stay behind me," he murmured. But Clementine didn't move back. She grabbed the fire poker from beside the hearth, gripping it with trembling determination. Footsteps approached the cabin. slow, predatory. Then a shadow crossed the frosted window. A man's voice drawled from outside. "Well, well, looks like the mountain finally coughed up its ghost. Brennan, you in there?" Clementine's blood ran cold. Tobias's expression hardened. "Crow." The door rattled as a fist slammed against it. "I heard you got yourself mauled like some wounded mutt," the voice mocked. "Figured now's the perfect time for me to take what's mine." Tobias glanced at Clementine, reading her fear and her resolve. He whispered, "No matter what happens, don't let him take you." She looked at him, eyes blazing. "He won't take either of us." Crow laughed outside, a cruel, humorless sound. "Open up, Brennan, or I'll burn that little cabin down with both of you inside." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Clementine's grip on the poker tightened. Tobias positioned himself between her and the door, shoulders squared despite the pain. The storm outside howled, the fire inside crackled, and the cabin, once a sanctuary, turned into the front line of a battle neither of them could avoid. "Stay close," Tobias whispered. "I'm not leaving you," she answered. Their fates were bound now by danger, by survival, by the fierce, fragile love neither of them had yet spoken aloud again. But Crow's shadow stretched across the snow, and the night was far from over. The door shuddered again, one brutal hit, then another, each blow shaking dust from the rafters. Clementine's pulse hammered in her ears, but she didn't step back. She planted her feet the way Tobias had taught her. Weight low, knees soft, ready. "Crow won't stop," Tobias whispered, steadying his breath. "He's been circling for months, but tonight he thinks I'm weak." Clementine lifted her chin, voice quiet but unshaken. "Let him find out he's wrong." Outside, Crow laughed, a deep, gloating sound that crawled under the skin. "You hiding behind a woman now, Brennan?" he taunted. "That's downright pathetic." Tobias's jaw clenched. "Don't listen to him." But Clementine wasn't listening. She was staring at the door as though she could burn through it with sheer determination. Another hit. Another. Then Crow's voice sharpened like a blade. "Last chance. I'll count to 3. Tobias stepped forward, gripping his knife. Clementine followed, fire poker in hand. "One—" Tobias shot her a look. "One last chance to run," but she shook her head. "2. Her voice was a whisper, but it steadied him more than steel. "Together." He nodded once. "3. The door slammed inward, splintering off its hinges. Snow gusted into the cabin, swirling around the enormous figure standing in the doorway. Jedediah Crow was taller than Tobias by an inch, white as a bear, with a beard matted by frost and eyes cold enough to freeze bone. And he was smiling. "Well now," Crow drawled, stepping inside, "ain't this sweet? The fat girl and the crippled hunter?" Clementine flinched, but only for a breath. Then she raised her chin. "Not today." Crow lunged toward Tobias, swinging a heavy fist. Tobias dodged, but pain shot through his still healing leg, slowing him just enough for Crow to slam him into the table. Wood cracked. Tobias fell hard, knife skidding across the floor. "Tobias!" Clementine cried. Crow turned to her, grinning with yellow teeth. "You must be the little stray he picked up. Bet you cook real good. Bet you scream even better." He reached for her. Clementine didn't scream. She swung. The fire poker cracked against Crow's forearm with a ringing clang. Crow snarled, stumbling back a step, not from pain, but from shock. "You little—" Before he could finish, Clementine swung again, this time aiming higher. Crow caught the poker with one hand, ripping it from her grip and tossing it across the room. But Clementine didn't fall back. She stood rooted, breathing hard, refusing to cower. That hesitation, 1/4 second, was all Tobias needed. He hurled himself from the floor, tackling Crow from behind. They crashed into the wall, the cabin shaking with the force. Crow roared and elbowed Tobias in the ribs, but Tobias clung to him with the strength of a man who refused to lose everything again. "Clementine!" Tobias shouted between gritted teeth. "The axe!" She spun. There, by the hearth, the woodcutter's axe leaning against the stone. She grabbed it, hands trembling but sure. Crow slammed Tobias against the wall. Tobias's breath left him in a choked gasp. Crow's knife flashed as he pulled it from his boot. "Tobias!" Clementine screamed. Crow raised the blade, and Clementine charged. Not with grace, not with training, but with every ounce of courage she had ever buried to survive. She crashed into Crow's side with the axe held sideways, knocking him off balance. The blade didn't cut flesh, but it hit hard enough to send him stumbling. Tobias seized the opening, grabbing Crow's wrist and forcing the knife down. Their boots kicked up snow and dirt. The fire hissed with sparks. Crow bellowed like a wounded bull. Then, with a final desperate heave, Tobias slammed Crow backward. The outlaw crashed into the cabin door frame, hitting it so hard the splintered wood snapped further. His head struck the edge with a sickening crack. Crow slumped. Silence. Clementine froze, axe trembling in her grip. "Tobias? Is he—" Tobias limped forward, kicked the knife away, and pressed 2 fingers to Crow's neck. He exhaled. Alive. Barely. But he won't get up any time soon. Clementine's knees buckled with relief. Tobias caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her against his chest. "You were brave," he whispered into her hair. "Braver than anyone I've ever known." "I thought I'd lose you," she sobbed. "You saved me. Again." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Clementine Ward." Crow groaned faintly, reminding them the danger wasn't gone. Tobias took Clementine's hand, squeezing it. "We'll take him to the sheriff come morning," he murmured. "But tonight, we hold on to each other." The fire crackled. The storm quieted, and in the flickering glow, 2 people who had been abandoned by the world stood together, unbroken. The storm eased by dawn, leaving the world glazed in white and silver. The cabin sat quietly beneath its blanket of snow, smoke curling from the chimney in a slow, steady ribbon. Inside, Clementine stirred a pot of porridge, while Tobias, moving gingerly but standing without help, tied rope around Jedediah Crow's wrists and ankles. The outlaw groaned once, but the blow to his skull had left him dazed, harmless for the moment. Tobias straightened, wincing, and turned his gaze toward Clementine. She stood by the hearth, hair tumbling loose, cheeks warming in the glow of the fire. There was softness in her posture, but also undeniable strength. Strength she hadn't known she carried until the night before. "You didn't sleep?" Tobias murmured. Clementine shook her head. "I wanted to make sure he didn't wake up. You watched over both of us." The way he said it made her breath catch. She lowered her eyes to the steaming pot. "I was afraid. For you. For us." Tobias crossed the room, slowly, because pain still tugged at every step, and rested a hand on her shoulder. She startled slightly, then relaxed under the warmth of his touch. "You protected me," he said softly. "I'll never forget that." Her throat tightened. "You would have done the same." "Maybe," he murmured. "But last night, I didn't feel strong at all." His fingers slid gently down her arm, stopping at her wrist. You were the one standing like a shield. Clementine didn't speak, not because she doubted him, but because her heart was full, too full for words. They ate together in quiet companionship. Tobias insisted she take the larger portion, but she pushed some of it back his way. For the first time, he didn't argue. Sharing food felt intimate, like a promise passed quietly between them. When the sun climbed higher, Tobias hitched up the old pack mule outside. With Crow tied across its back like unwelcome luggage, they made their way toward town. The crisp air stung Clementine's cheeks, but Tobias stayed close beside her, steadying her whenever her boot slipped on the icy ground. By the time they reached Hollow Bend, the sheriff took one look at Crow's bruised head and bound wrists and whistled low. "Brennan," he said, shaking his head, "looks like you ran into trouble." "Tried to," Tobias replied. "Didn't succeed." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "We'll lock him up. Man's been stirring trouble for 2 years. You did this town a service." As the deputy dragged Crow inside, Tobias leaned down to whisper in Clementine's ear. "You see," he murmured, "you helped bring down a dangerous man." Clementine's face warmed with pride, a feeling she'd rarely known. They walked back toward the mule together. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the bright sky. The world felt softer somehow, gentler. "Tobias," she said quietly, "what happens now?" He turned to her, breath fogging in the cold. "What do you want to happen?" She hesitated, fingers twisting in her mittens. "I want to stay, if you want me here." Tobias's eyes softened, like winter thaw giving way to spring. "I've wanted you here from the moment you stitched my wounds," he said. "But I didn't want to trap you. I wanted you to choose." "I choose you," she whispered. Tobias reached for her hand, not urgently, not possessively, just gently, as though holding something precious. The quiet street around them faded. The cold eased. "You're safe here, Clementine," he said, voice low and sincere. "Safe with me, safe in these mountains, safe in the life we're building." Her eyes filled, but this time with warmth, not sorrow. "And if you'll have it," Tobias added, thumb brushing her knuckles, "this can be your home now." A home. The word landed like sunlight on her heart. Soft, bright, true. Clementine nodded, voice trembling. "Yes, I want that." And in the middle of a quiet mountain town dusted with snow, 2 people who had once been left for dead stood together, choosing each other instead of loneliness, choosing hope instead of fear, choosing a future instead of the past that tried to break them. Every time I tell a story like Clementine and Tobias's, I'm reminded of something simple but powerful. None of us really knows what tomorrow brings, or who might walk into our lives when we need them most. Sometimes the world pushes people to the edge of survival, yet somehow kindness finds a way back. If you're listening right now, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this from? Your comments remind me how stories travel across oceans and mountains, connecting hearts that have never met. And if you still believe in love after everything you've lived through, stay close. The next story is for you.